Good afternoon and welcome to the Healthier Overview and Scrutiny Committee. First task this afternoon is to appoint a new chair. I'd like to hand over to the legal officer.
Thank you, Helen. Yes, members of the committee, the position is that the normal chair can't be in attendance this afternoon due to unavoidable reasons. So in those circumstances, what we need to do, please, from the membership of the committee, is to nominate someone to act as the chair just for this afternoon's meeting. So what is required is for the members to nominate and for that to be seconded, and then we'll take a vote on whether that person should act as chair today, and that will just be for today. Obviously, if more than one person is put forward, then there'll have to be a couple of votes to decide who is the chair. So can I ask members if they've got any nominations for chair for this afternoon, please?
Can I nominate Councillor Stuart Evans, please?
Thank you. Thank you. So Councillor Evans has been nominated to act as chair. Are you willing to take that role, Councillor Evans?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Could I have a vote from members as to whether they're happy that Councillor Evans should act as chair this afternoon, please? Thank you. Thank you, members. I believe that's unanimous. So, Councillor Evans, if you would like to take the position of chair, and we can then start the meeting from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Tim. And obviously, the chair can't be here for personal reasons today, and that's why we arranged me sitting in the chair this afternoon. So I hope you'll all bear with me as a temporary chair for this meeting. Okay, there's a couple of house rules that I need to make you aware of this afternoon. But before I do that, good afternoon to everyone. It's a wonderful afternoon. We are unfortunately in here, but we're discussing serious business, and that's what we're here for. But before I go on now, I'd like to remind you that this meeting is being broadcast live on the internet, so we're all on camera. You need to be aware of that. And you also need to be aware that you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your mic. This meeting is available to view online, now and in the future, whenever and wherever people want to watch it. There is no need for any other filming of the meeting to take place. We welcome the use of Welsh language at meetings. I've had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. Obviously, I have already said I'd like to welcome everyone attending the meeting today and anyone watching the meeting via the webcast. Please can all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put onto silent. If there is an emergency alarm while this meeting is taking place, please follow the green signs and go to the ground floor on the Civic car park. Thank you very much. We'll proceed to the agenda. Item number 1 is the attendance.
The register's name.
The register is circulated here for you to sign.
Yes, apologies for absence have been received from Rose Seaborn, Chair, Councillor Rose Seaborn, and obviously Councillor Gwyn Jenkins.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for that. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Likewise, if you have any declarations of interest, you need to sign the register.
Thank you, Chair. Do members have any questions in relation to declarations this afternoon, please? I'm not aware of any beforehand that are likely to arise here. Okay, thank you, members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. The third item on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting on pages 33 to 34. Oh, sorry. Apologise for that, members. Is 3 to 32. And shall we take them page by page? Page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, and finally page 10. Are there any issues to be brought up in regards to those minutes, members? That is no. And we'll go on to item 4, which is the action sheet on pages 33 to 34.
Okay, members, there's just one outstanding item on the action sheet, and this is relating to the timing of a notification of safeguarding incidents to schools. I've written to the Chief Officer and it's generated a lot of discussion, and this is ongoing, and as soon as I get a response, I can forward it on to you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Ellen. Are there any...
Excuse me, Chair, there's a second set of minutes. You went up to page 10, but they actually go up to page 32. Of course, some of the pages are Welsh, but there is a second set of minutes.
Thank you for that, Jacqueline. Yeah, I omitted the pages 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. Likewise, are there any points to be raised there regarding those minutes? Oh, I take that as a no. Thank you. Go on to item 5, which is the Vanguard progress made by implementing the new way of working in Torfaen wellbeing teams. And I understand that we have a guest with us this afternoon to give us information on the Vanguard methodology. Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, Simon. Welcome to the meeting this afternoon of the Healthcare Communities and Overview Scrutiny. It's a wonderful afternoon you've come here to join us today, and we look forward to hearing the information that you have to give to us. I'll do a round of introductions. My name is Councillor Stuart Evans, and I represent the Blaenavon ward, and we'll go around the table if you will, please.
I'm Helen Deakin, I'm the Scrutiny Officer supporting this committee.
Councillor Nick Jones, representing Newin Ward.
Councillor Joanne Gordon, representing Crossy Ceiliog North.
Councillor Mike Jerry-Meyer, representing Newin Pannan Ward.
Councillor Faye Jones, representing St Giles Ward. Hi.
Can I apologise for some members that were due to be here today, Simon, but unfortunately for various reasons they can't be. But they have left us with some questions that they wish to be put to you. Okay? Thank you very much. Let's start with the first question to you, Simon. Is in regard, can you explain the methodology of the Vanguard system, please?
No problem, thank you. I'm sorry you've had to stay in here on a beautiful afternoon like this, but lovely to be here. Certainly, it's based on our research from about 30 years ago from psychology of why change doesn't work. So we did lots of studying on why change doesn't work, and people have great intentions, but it doesn't happen. So we developed some work around what's called intervention theory in terms of how people get stuck in particular ways of thinking and find it very hard to get out of those. So the method is designed to help people just test their assumptions about how things should be done. So we take the leaders into the work to have a study, to have a look, okay, let's have a look what's going on currently. And they experience things such as asking people what matters to them in their homes, studying the work, going through lots of case files. What we're trying to do is build up a sort of picture of predictability. This is predictably what happens. And then they tend to find things they want to change. And as a result of that, I help them think, well, what led to this problem in the first place? What was our thinking that led to that? And lots of things came out from the work we did, such as we used to think having specialist teams, OTs and social workers, was an efficient way of doing things. And when we studied files and talked to people, we learned that actually people in their homes would rather just have one point of contact. And there was lots of referrals and lots of paperwork going around. So as a result, they came up with a different principle, which was retain ownership, pull in, rather than refer on. So once they came up with a new principle, they tested them out in your ward, so in Blenheim, and that was found to work well in terms of morale of the people working there, outcomes for people, and they were commissioning a lot less services, they found. And what we managed to do at the same time was try and reduce some of the bureaucracy, although that continues to be a problem in some areas. So as a result, once we learned that works, the decision then is made, do we want to make that normal elsewhere? So it's tested before anything's happened. The decision was made to say, right, we think this is working well as it stands. We'd like it to be everywhere. They were faced with quite a difficult decision then, because ideally what we'd like to do is take every practitioner through a sort of their own sort of learning environment. So come up to Blenheim, see how the team works and learn how to do it themselves. But as you can imagine, it's quite hard to do that with geography. So the decision was made, well, what we'll do is we'll just throw the teams together. There was a bit more to thinking than that, and all credit to Jill and Joe around that. We'll throw the team together and we'll help them when they're in their new teams. So the OTs and social workers started working in their own team. And then they put in place some frameworks to help people reflect and make sure that they were learning and improving. So the fishbowl framework, some of the measures they've been using, and the hierarchy of support to make sure we help the person reflect on their strengths before we start making them dependent on services. So it starts with study, then experiment, and then if the experiment works, how do we make it normal? But it's all based from a psychological perspective rather than processes, if you know what I mean. So.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. And yes, we visited certain areas where that was in place, and we were very encouraged by the procedures and the morale of the staff as well. So we were encouraged by it. And I've got another question to ask, and can I ask Councillor Faye Jones to take this? And the second question, please.
Can I just ask how many... Oh, sorry. There we are, that's better. Can I just ask how many Welsh councils are you working with at this time?
No problem. With regard to health and social care, we're working with Monmouthshire and Gwynedd, and have done in the past worked with Powys, Carmarthenshire, Blaen y Gwent and Caerphilly. Trying to think. Yes, we're working with some third sector organisations in the care provision sector as well. So it's really nice to bring the two together.
Yes, we've seen that. It's very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye. The third question, could I ask you, Nick, to take the third question, please?
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Simon. How do you actually resolve issues that occur when the system thinking design systems encounter those of partner organisations?
That never happened, so it's all fine. No, I'm only joking. Of course, it's a real big issue. And one of the key constraints to moving it forward is our relationship with health colleagues, and we have every sympathy with them working in a very difficult environment. But it's very tricky, so we rely again on intervention theory. So trying to sit in a meeting and persuade health colleagues, for example, that it's we're finding lots of people being referred to us from hospital who actually in the end don't really need any help and support. So is there anything we can do to maybe do something while they're in hospital to reassure them, to talk to families, say actually you've got lots of strengths and skills, you maybe don't need social services. So it's difficult in a meeting to persuade that, because in health, if I'm sat in health, I'm thinking I've got lots of beds filling up, I've got ambulances queuing outside, I just need these people out of hospital. So what we've got to do is create what we call normative experiences. So help them study the system from the perspective of patients to understand what it feels like to go through that system. And then they'll experience actually there may be a different way of doing this, and maybe our assumptions about everyone needs a bit of social care when they come in aren't necessarily true. So what else can we do? The difficulty, of course, is getting them to be able to take the time out to do that study. And all credit to Jill and Joe, they've worked extremely hard to try and get that to happen. I've worked with Public Health Wales around this as well, and they're very keen. But the volume of demand that's hitting health is very, very tricky for them. And trying to help them see that actually if we help people properly the first time, we might not get that demand coming back in is understandably very difficult for them to see. We would suggest a normative experience rather than trying to persuade, because people just end up in an argument, really. So it'll be trying to study the system together. My understanding is that some work's going to be done in Gwent through, I think Jill and Julie Boothroyd in Monmouthshire are going to lead a bit of work to help some health colleagues do exactly as we've talked there. But obviously getting the logistics off the ground is quite tricky, getting people to take the time out. But that's how we do it. Other partner organisations that they have worked with have been able to take the time out to study, and that's gone very, very well. But health is particularly tricky, and always has been in my experience. So, thank you.
Do you need a supplementary, Nick?
No. Thank you very much for the answer. It's quite comprehensive. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Can I take question 4? It's regarding local authorities are reliant on funding from the Welsh Government, bound by legislation and external influences relating to governance. How can these be competing?
So sorry, would you mind articulating or expanding on that a little more? Just make sure I answer for you.
Well, I'll reiterate the question to you, Simon. Is local authorities are reliant on funding from the Welsh Government, as we all know, and are bound by legislation and external influences relating to the governance. How can these be competing?
My apologies, yeah, I understand. Well, what we encourage people to do, and Joe and Jill are doing some good work around this, is to study what perfect would look like, and then look at what we have to do. So there will be legislative requirements, and one of the rules we have is don't break the law. So let's study what the legislative requirements are that might be getting in the way of doing what matters. And if they are a problem, then we can maybe challenge that legislation, or we just have to accept that's what we need to do. The work we did in Monmouthshire about 6 years ago actually led us to start challenging the legislation, and was one of the things instrumental in the new Act, because it wasn't necessarily helpful then. It is much more helpful now. In my experience, the new legislation enables local authorities to do the right thing if they choose to, which is absolutely fantastic. The inspectorate is another question, and some of the things the inspectorate are doing is causing care providers to be very, very nervous about doing anything different or taking responsibility. I can fully understand from their perspective. So again, I'd advocate let's get the inspectors in to study the work and see the consequences of those difficulties. And in terms of the funding, if we get it right for people, they don't come back as often. So the funding can take care of itself, and certainly we're seeing early indications of that. I don't like the phrase, but that turning the curve. So if the funding was going to have to go like that, because by seeing more and more demand, and what you're beginning to see here is it's going a bit like that actually we can cope with more people now with the same amount of money, because we're getting it right for them, so they don't need to come back. Is that helpful?
Thank you very much for that, Simon.
No problem.
My fifth question actually can go to Joe, please.
Simon. Could you update us on the progress and the success of testing out the models Pan Gwent for learning disability and adult mental health teams, please?
No problem at all. This was some time ago now. I'm not close to it. I haven't been for about 18 months. They had a good model on the ground, but they had real difficulty getting it structurally in place. So my understanding is it's reverted back to how it used to work, unfortunately. Although I did hear from... but it's all third hand, that some of the things we were trying to do have started to move forward in terms of how they're engaging with individuals with mental health and learning disabilities. I know Monmouthshire have sort of been quite at the forefront of that work, and they've seen some great outcomes and have a huge saving in their budget. What we haven't been able to do is sort of engage with all partners, Health Again, to sort of do that across Gwen, which is a real shame, but it is what it is, really. And talking to the leadership there, when I was working with them, it was quite frustrating, I think, for them that they weren't able to progress it further as fast as they can. I guess it's the difficulty partly of working with so many partners. Trying to get a sort of single way of working is always difficult. So it's a real shame, and certainly I wish it would have gone better. But my understanding is it's reverted back in most places. As I say, Monmouthshire are doing some good stuff. And so individual local authorities, I think, could take the opportunity to take it forward if they chose to.
To ask a supplementary, Jill?
Obviously, you were talking about the model reverting back. Is that something that often happens with the Vanguard model in adult mental health and learning disability? And when it does happen, what support is there to try again then, or do you look to another model of working?
Certainly, it's not something that's happened often, and it tends to be a can the leaders drive it, really, because I can turn up and help them see what they need to do, but I can't do it because I don't run the place, unfortunately. That's the difficulty. So it's very much an informed choice for leaders. It has to be psychology. They have to choose whether they want to go forward or not. So my job is to help them get to the point of making an informed choice. It is difficult for everyone concerned, really, particularly for the practitioners who have been working in a new way. And I certainly counsel leaders on, I did in that case, how we'll mitigate some of the difficulties that would happen to people. But it's a real shame, that sort of thing. But it's got to be really in the hands of the leadership if they choose to take it forward. And if they're able to take it forward, some of the constraints we talked about is very difficult. And I have every sympathy if I was walking in their shoes as well. It's a very, very tough job to do. So.
Thank you, Simon. Leads us to the last question we have for you this afternoon, Simon. You may be glad to hear, which is, how will the Pan Gwent learning disability and adult mental health teams complement and integrate with the newly designed teams?
In terms of the teams you have here in Torvai, well, perfect would be we're working on a locality basis. So if I'm someone experiencing mental health difficulties, much like the design you've got here, I could just talk to my local team without those specialist functions. And that's where we'd love to get to. Unfortunately, that's in the hands of all the different partners involved. As a result, again, this is third party, but I understand the teams are having some difficulty in some cases engaging with colleagues on that arena, and in other cases they're having some successes. So it seems to be down at the moment to sort of local relationships. Perfect would be it becomes more systematic, and we don't have to rely on local relationships. It's just working very, very smoothly. Jill and Joe are working very hard in terms of how we can engage that interface with health, but it's a very long, slow road is what they've found, unfortunately. Other local authorities have had more success with that than others. And again, local leadership in health is quite crucial with that sort of thing. But again, I have every sympathy with colleagues in health. They're dealing with a lot of demand and a lot of work, and it's very hard for them to see a way through that. I'm not sure whether that fully answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Simon. It does. Are there any other questions that you wish to put to Simon this afternoon, members? No? Well, it just remains for me to thank you very much, Simon, for coming this afternoon and talking to us, and we appreciate your input. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
You are welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you want to, but if you feel free to leave if you have to.
Thank you.
Okay.
It might be best if I leave, just in case you want to talk about me when I'm not here, and it'd be easier for you to do that. But thank you for your time. Thank you.
Good afternoon, both. Warm welcome to the Scrutiny Committee this afternoon. I'm Councillor Stewart Evans. I'm standing in for the chair, who is unfortunately has got a family illness. I think most of us know each other around the table, but we will do an introduction in case we don't all know each other. I'm Councillor Stewart Evans, and I represent the Glenavon ward.
I'm Helen Deakin. I'm the Scrutiny Officer supporting the committee.
Councillor Nick Jones, representing Newin ward.
Councillor Joe Gordon, representing Crossy Ceiliog North.
Councillor Mike Jeremiah, representing Wayne Palin.
And Councillor Faye Jones, representing St Giles.
I'm Jo Newman, I'm Group Manager for Adult Services.
And I'm Joe Padlett, Head of Adult Services.
Thank you everyone for the introductions, and we'll lead straight into the questions. We don't want to keep you too long here this afternoon on a wonderful afternoon like this. You've all got gardening duties, I'm sure. But this is nevertheless an important discussion that we're having this afternoon for future well-being of our citizens. Can I start the first question and ask Councillor Jeremiah to take this, please?
Good afternoon, both. What are the staffing structures of each team?
When we first looked at designing the teams, we spent, well, I have to say, Joe spent considerable time looking at doing the background work of how many cases were in each team, looking at the particular presentations in that team. Can I just say, for an example, in some patch teams, there are more Bronavon housing, so therefore some of the referrals for occupational therapy referrals would go straight to Bronavon OTs. So what we started to do was think about, okay, first of all, how many people as a benchmark would you need in each team? Yeah, and then try and find in the right configuration for whether that's social workers, OTs. We thought about new roles around reablement assistants, occupational therapy assistants, but with the knowledge that it was almost like a first stab. So for each of the teams, there is the 5 patch teams, there is a team lead. For 2 of the teams, that is the East Cumbrian Wellbeing team. Howard Hopkins, who's the team lead for that team, also takes responsibility for the adult mental health team. And then Cathy Marshall, the team lead for Central Cumbrian, also takes the responsibility for the learning disability team. And the rationale for that was their client base in their patches is a lot smaller than the other 3 teams. So there is a team lead in each team, and then there are 2 assistant team leads in each of the teams. Not all social workers, assistant team leads, they all have kind of maybe additional roles and responsibilities. So, for example, in North Torvine, we've got assistant team lead, it's a social worker, and another assistant team lead that's actually a social worker but takes responsibility for continuing healthcare. In another team, it might be as an occupational therapy profession. So there's a variety of different professions in the assistant team lead role. And then the staff that sit under those teams are a mixture of social workers, OTs, reablement assistants, occupational therapist assistants as well.
CCWs.
And community care workers. Thank you, Jo.
Councillor Jeremiah, do you need to? Right. Could I just ask something, Jill, on the back of Councillor Jeremiah's question? I think it would be useful to members to know that information. You've given a lot of information on that request. Could we have that information for members? I think it would be very, very useful.
It's no problem at all. What we have is, which I think we previously circulated, was actually the areas that the patches cover. And all I can describe those diagrams for those of you who, I have to say, probably are old enough to remember play school. That comes under kind of little houses, and under the houses is all the areas in that are covered in that patch. And then with that information, we have a list of staff and their roles, so we can circulate that, if that would help.
Thank you very much for that, Jill. The second question is also Councillor Mike Jeremiah's as well. So, Mike, can you give your question?
What is the geographical makeup of each patch?
So, North Owain Wellbeing Team goes from top of Glenavon down to Pont Newydd, and then Pontypool Wellbeing Team takes from Pont Newydd into New Inn, Griffithstown, Sebastopol. Central Cwmbran then takes Pontyddrun and then into Pont Newydd. East Cwmbran is your Crossy Ceiliog, Glanarafon kind of area, and then West Cwmbran is St Giles, Fairwater, and those areas around there, Upper Cwmbran. Yeah.
Thank you.
You wish a supplementary, Councillor Jeremiah? No?
As mentioned, Councillor, all that information we can circulate. That would be part of the...
Yeah, I was going to say perhaps that could be encapsulated with the information I requested earlier. Okay, we go on to question 3, which ironically is my question. How do you expand the learning gained by the pilot and translate it into the different communities, given the strong community cohesion in Glenavon, which obviously, Jill, you know, I reside in Glenavon.
Yeah, Glenavon is a strong community, and that was one of the reasons we chose it for the pilot area, alongside working with other professionals in the area. It's working out that other communities are strong too, and we're getting to know those communities really well. And they've all got different sort of focuses and different personalities, shall we say, in terms of the community then. So we know now that in Central Cwmbran we've got a lot of people with COPD and breathing problems. We've got the Canalside Resource Centre in Central Cwmbran, so we're linking in people to the specialist health that is there. We know that in West Cwmbran there's more of the residential and nursing homes, so we're making more links there and outside with the community, strong communities in Hentless and other places. So we're getting to know our communities and to know what's out there. And going forward, that will be a critical part of our ongoing role, really.
Thank you very much for that, Joe. And I take the point that you make about the different industries that have gone on in the various communities. And also the fact that some communities have more sheltered housing complexes than others. So, yeah, it would be interesting to see how it unfolds. Thank you very much.
Can I just add, Councillor Evans, that, as I said, when we're setting up the teams, it was a bit of a, okay, let's just go for that, and we'll have to see what's presenting. In each of the teams, I think you visited some of the teams, they have what they call an expertise grid. So, which is as simple as it's a big piece of paper up on the wall. So when they feel actually they need to pull another professional in to support them with the work that they are doing alongside the clients, they write it on a piece of paper, because we know one size doesn't fit all. So as Joe said, that we know in Central Cwmbran there is a significant number of clients who have COPD, respiratory problems. So we need to build different links. In another area, there might be a small cohort of clients that need particular mental health input. So what we've been trying to do, or what we have been doing over the last 18 months, is building up that picture so that when, again, which we do, that when we have a vacancy, we can think, actually, do we need to replace that vacancies with the same as far as that professional, or do we need to bring in different expertise or a different professional to get the complement right in that team, which is a reflection of that community.
Thank you for that, Jill. Yeah, we did visit, several members of the scrutiny committee visited the various areas, and I was fortunate enough to attend the one at Canalside, where we seen it in evidence, the T-card system. It was very good, and all the staff there were very enthusiastic about it, so really encouraged by that. Thank you, Jill. I want to question 4 now, and I'm going to ask Faye if you'll take this, please.
Hi both. Has the South West Cwmbran team been located within the patch locality?
No. The plan is that they will be based in Bronavon. This, I guess, is the West Cwmbran wellbeing team, Zoe's team. We have had some problems with the IT, and I had a meeting week before last, and at the moment we are waiting for BT to come out and do the feasibility study. It's all linked to making sure the IT is all linked up, and fibre optics and the right green box. That's as technical as I get, but I did recently meet with SRS and Bronavon just to ensure that we're progressing, but we're in the hands of BT at the moment.
I'm just going to ask you, you're in the Bronavon building. Are you working hand in glove with Bronavon, or do you work separately?
The plan being that we have our own separate area. Bronavon have been really accommodating in that they've moved their staff to provide an area of the building that provides some confidentiality when we're having those daily discussions. But what we hope to do is build the links with the housing officers as well in Bronavon, so that we have a number of clients in common, so that we can start working effectively together about them learning a little bit more about what we do, and vice versa. So that's the plan, but obviously we haven't been in the position to test that out yet.
Can I just...
Yep.
When we did some of the Vanguard training at the beginning, some of the Bronavon officers from the housing department, they were part of the Vanguard training, so they know the model. And we also work closely with the Bronavon OTs as well, so they know the Vanguard model as well. So we're hoping that once we're in the building, that we can make those links even stronger.
I think that's great, and working together is really good. There are one or two cases that I know of in my ward where people have got an ongoing dispute with Bronavon and will disagree with what they're saying about them or different things. How would you cope with that if you're working closely with Bronavon?
I think that's about taking on, a professional stance, really. There will always be times when social work or housing departments or whoever don't agree, and we sometimes have to agree to disagree, but still work professionally together. So that will be important, I think.
And I would add to that sometimes there are times where there is a difference between opinion between clients, carers and adult social care. But I think it is about going back to kind of, what is the evidence around both of those positions, really? And as Jo said, there is sometimes where you unfortunately have to agree to disagree, because it is sometimes about professional judgment. It is about our view of risk. It's about an individual view of risk, and it's about an individual's view of their priority, where we might have a different view as we are looking at the whole system and the whole population needs and presenting risks for Torfaen, and absolutely appreciate from that individual's point of view, they are going to think that they're the priority but don't have that overview. So there are going to be times where we would be, as a professional, be advocating on behalf of that person, and there will be other times, I would suggest, where actually we might be in agreement with the position of Bronavon. It's about the facts, really, to support that case.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to come on the back of that, because I agree with what you were saying. There is conflict sometimes, and it goes on, and poor people are stuck in the middle who need the service. So I do agree with the councillor's point there.
My only concern is with a very, very tiny minority of people that because you're in the Bronavon building, they may be put off from going to the locality. If that's the case, could they swap to a different locality?
Sorry, could I just clarify? Is it? We wouldn't expect members of the public to be attending Bronavon to see a social worker as a matter of course. We would be going out to see the member of the public. We're not seeing it as a base for If people, for any particular reason, want to visit the office, they would do so and make an appointment in advance, and then we would look for a room for them to do that. But we wouldn't be expecting people to be just calling in to see social workers. They would be, or other professionals, they would be going out to see them in their own home environment.
That's great, you've clarified that for me, thank you.
Okay, Faye. Question 5, and that's myself. What are the benefits of the modelling costs to the service, considering the costs of consultants, intake team interventions, and associated accommodation costs?
The costs of the consultancy, Vanguard Consultancy, over the period when we started, which was December 2015, has been 97,000. So up to during that period, we've been fortunate in that we secured 279,000 from the Intermediate Care Fund for last financial year. It was slightly less for 16-17 because it was on a pro rata basis, and we've also secured that 297 for this financial year as well. So we have been the model in our business case certainly attracted external funding. We've used that funding as for the transition, because we recognise that to work differently, initially you're going to need additional staff. Part of the model is you're having a different relationship and a different conversation with clients and carers. That takes time. So we recognised that we needed to invest in more staff to have that upfront conversation, which we've done. That's what we've used that 279,000 for last year, was additional staff, some of the training for Vanguard, and the additional costs for some of that domiciliary care pilot that you mentioned. So we funded that through that external grant. What we see is, and what we can see, is the more input we put up front in that conversation, then the social worker or the OT or the reablement assistant becomes that support, rather than being reliant on commissioning external services. And we refer, you may have heard about it, what we call a third-party budget. All a third-party budget is, it's the money that we use to commission services, whether that's a domiciliary care package, whether it's external daycare, whether it's a residential nursing placement. So what we're seeing is the way we're working differently. We just don't go in, do a quick assessment, and I'm kind of really not saying, the way I'm saying it sounds as if the way we worked was absolutely atrocious, and I'm not saying it is, but just paraphrasing it. Go in, do a quick assessment. Oh, hang on, we've got a list of things here. We can give you dom care, we can give you Meals on Wheels or whatever. So, yeah, and that costs £136 a week, whatever, and that's what we'll do. We don't work like that anymore. We don't go in with a menu of services. So what we're seeing is we're having conversations with people about getting them to think about different ways they can help themselves, and actually focusing on the things they can do rather than they can't. And we're spending less money on those services we were commissioning. So last year, for example, 16-17, we adult services actually came in £1 million under budget. This financial year, I can't confirm what the 17-18, because we're now 17-18 outturn. As you're aware, the finance colleagues are still trying to, just finalising those figures. I would expect we will not be at £1 million and under. However, we will be significantly underspent. And when that figure is confirmed, I will share that with committee. So for the 97,000 outlay for the consultants and the additional staffing, which we've managed to fund through an external grant, which we had through a business case. Yeah, I think it's very much we're evidencing that we are reducing our spend at a time when the demand is increasing. So it's not as even if we're flatlining, which I think eventually we will. But this is our whole approach was we had to work differently because we knew we couldn't continue to carry on what we were doing with the demands increasing as they were doing. Joe has been living and breathing this for the last 2 years or whatever, so I didn't see if Joe wants to add anything to that.
No, it is about getting to the heart of the matter really with people we work with and having that what matters conversation, because the presenting need on a referral is not always, in fact 99.9% of the time, is not really what is happening and what is occurring for that individual. So building a relationship with that individual helps them to build the trust in the professional, to help them to problem solve for themselves really, in most cases, with a little bit of support and commission services maybe at the beginning of their illness or the beginning of the hospital discharge, but eventually becoming independent.
We still do have challenges around hospital discharges in that we have a referral from the ward, and by the time we get to the ward to have that what matters conversation, a consultant or somebody may have already had that conversation and say, you need a residential nursing placement, or you need 4 calls a day with 2 carers, and that's before we've even had a conversation. So we do have a challenge there, which we are trying to address, but as you can appreciate how many wards there are and how many staff there are, it is a huge challenge.
It puts us on the back foot, I think, as the expectations are set before we've got there to tell how we could manage it in a different way, really.
Thank you both for that. Very interesting. I just wanted to ask you, Jill, you mentioned that more staff have been taken on. Do you think that you've got adequate staff now for the purpose?
No. We've always got challenges, and we're constantly juggling. Joe and I met last week because we know we've got gaps where we have some waiting list referrals backing up, so we were looking at who we could move where we could increase temporary hours, where we could put some temporary staff in. So my board on my wall looks a complete mess, but I understand it. At a total cost of additional £13,500 for the whole year, wasn't it? So we are constantly looking at that and seeing what the waiting lists are. Can we move people around? Is there capacity there? But as the demands and the complexity are getting more, it is getting more and more challenging.
One of the things about the model is things evolve over time, and you're constantly learning about what that demand is and how that demand can be met. So we do have some interesting conversations at times about what's happening where and in which patch, really. But that's the interesting part of the model. It does evolve.
And can I just add one more thing, sorry, Chair, that one of the pieces of work I think we recognise that we're still very much on the infancy is part of the model is about building relationships and building trust. However, I think we've got to skill our practitioners about how they can then withdraw from that relationship, and that's not about just turning them back away and say, that's it, but we cannot, with the volume of clients that we see, we cannot just keep them to dropping back in just to see if things are okay. But there's a skill about how you withdraw with still keeping the trust and that relationship open to say, I'm not going to be contacting you, but if there's a problem, you know where we are. And I think there's a little bit of reluctance to withdraw at the moment. So we're probably, and I'm saying probably because we're still doing the analysis, staying a bit too long with our intervention with the clients. And I'm looking to Jo for some, because she does the more of the analysis and I do a bit of the gut.
There is a particular skill in withdrawing. Once you've built a relationship with somebody, we all know that it's difficult to step back out. And it's how we work with practitioners to celebrate how far we've worked with somebody and celebrate the success of that work and how we've enabled people now to become problem solvers for themselves. And rather than seeing it as a negative event to withdraw from somebody's life, seeing it as a positive event and how we can change thinking in that way too.
Why I mentioned that, sorry I bring you in now, Faye. Why I mentioned that, Jill, about if you've got enough staff, you mentioned the £1 million underspend, and I just thought that's a source that you could employ more staff with.
Sorry. Do your practitioners use a sort of brief therapy at the end of an intervention to show people where they've been and where they've come from?
We use a variety of different tools during our intervention. What we're looking at, particularly using within the patches, is strengths mapping at the moment. So we can work with people in a sort of pictorial way, written way, and with families to see what the problem was at the beginning and how we've come. Yeah.
I would say that is in its infancy. We've done some training with one of the teams about how we map that out, and then we're starting to have those conversations with the other teams. Again, it's a skill to and it's how we support practitioners to understand. It's not a competition that just because you feel that the client was feeling that they were at number 1 in the scale, you don't have to get to number 5. So it's okay if actually at the end of that intervention they're at number 2, or actually they're at number 1 because they might have gone down to 0. It's also about maintenance, but again it's a different approach which takes time.
It's the distance travelled for the individual. For some people to go from 1 to 2 is a huge distance. For some people to go from 1 to 10 is a smaller distance. About the distance travelled and the experiences that they've gone through, really.
Thank you.
Happy with that, Faye? Anyone else want to speak on that subject? Yeah.
You touched on, you were in the middle of doing some analysis on the amount of time that staff spend with people in their own home. Has there been any formal evaluation of the old system to the new design you're using now?
We've evaluated, and certainly in terms of caseload numbers, not in terms of time, that's something else we're looking at now. What we know we need to do is to implement some particular patch measures, which we've started from February this year, introducing those into the patches, and our first data shot is around June time. But we know now for the coming year that we have to concentrate on our measures, and our measures will show us how far we've come.
Nick, can I ask you to ask question 6, please?
Apologies. Just following on from the model that you're using, we were interested to know if you actually share best practice and whether it's actually shared to reduce the costs across the patch variation where it's appropriate to do so. Do you do things like that?
Enabling group, yeah. One of the models that we use is called an enabling group. So on a bi-monthly basis, sometimes more often if there's an issue, we will invite all the team leads, assistant team leads and some of the practitioners together. We'll take a topic and we'll unpick that topic and we'll look at how it's been developed in each of the patches and where good practice might be and how the patches can learn from one another. We might also introduce other colleagues into that enabling group. We held one recently on falls, so we invited the falls managers and other health service colleagues into that meeting so that we could learn a bit more about how we were going to manage falls and what that looked like in each of the patches. So we take a topic and we unpick it basically. And in terms of best practice outside of the authority, we were invited by Vanguard organisation to share best practice with other organisations. So Torvine is being seen as an area of best practice in this model.
In fact, there was a presentation at the National Vanguard Conference in London.
One of the reasons maybe we were looking at that, you said earlier in your presentation that you had different problems in different areas within the particular teams, and we're quite interested to see that whether there's one system which you could spread across all teams, or whether there is still a need to operate differently within the individual teams. And if that happens, do you keep a close eye to make sure that the best practice is shared where it is appropriate? This is perhaps more of what we were getting at on that.
So the methodology is shared across all the patches. So we have our referral routes are shared across the patches. Our fishbowl model reflective practice is shared. Our hierarchy of support is shared in the way that we look at resources. So the methodology itself is shared, but the individual characteristics of the patches, I think, will always come across. There will always be slight different geographical differences depending on who is in the community and what that community needs.
There are some process issues, as Joe said, about kind of like the referral and the flows that will be generic to all patches. So I'm just thinking, for example, there's another piece of work that Joe's just started with the finance team, because one of the things that we can see in from each of the teams and the feedback from the enabling group is actually there's quite a lot of processes within the finance system, because obviously we assess people around their financial charges. So Joe has recently facilitated the first workshop with colleagues from finance to break down what happens now, because it's all about what adds value, what are the steps that we do that don't add value that we can take out. So that piece of work has started with a number of different actions allocated across the members of that task and finish group, and a second date set.
6 weeks' time, yeah.
So that's something where we bring people in from all the patches because it's relevant to them all, and then we will look at trying to streamline that system to take any unnecessary waste out of the system. Is that the type of thing you were thinking of? Or?
Yes, it is. You've explained that quite well. We just wanted to make sure that if things are working very well in a particular area, that was shared across others, and that you didn't have different systems working autonomously across the system.
Yeah.
One of the risks of working in a patch area is what we call silo thinking. So we're just a patch and we stay within that patch and we don't spread out anywhere. We very much want to get away from that, and there's very much cross-fertilisation of patches. So there may be an OT that's got a particular skill in one area that another patch doesn't have, so that OT will travel to that patch and work with that patch, upskilling that patch. There may be particular resources in one patch that another patch doesn't have, and then so there'll be cross thinking about that in terms of residential, nursing homes, day activities, those sort of things. We've been lucky enough to be working with Vanguard, and although we probably won't be as polished as they are, we've learnt the model now in terms of how you break things down and how you put them back together in a different way. So myself and my colleague Sarah, we can do the model now without Vanguard being there. We'll always go back to Vanguard and ask questions, but we can do the model ourselves within the department and within the patches to make sure that we're following the right path.
And we encourage team members to, if they're not sure, to go and have a look. And we were very good at that, particularly when the North Torvine, where they had, obviously it was a pilot, they had more knowledge, they had more experience. And not just the team lead or assistant team lead, the social workers, community care workers, all members of that team were going into the other patches when they were starting off in their fish bowls to give them support about, actually, we tried that bit and it didn't really work. We thought this worked better. So those kind of, we've got a problem with this. Has anybody else cracked it? So those kind of conversations are ongoing.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Just one final...
Through the chair, please, Nick.
I am sorry.
Okay. come back in, I assume.
I did just
Yeah,
very
go on
quickly.
then. And yeah, why I'm saying this, I'm mindful that we've got a lot of questions here to be asked, and there's a lot of information you've given us.
I'll be brief
A lot
on
of
my
the
answers,
information that you have given
yeah.
us are in some of the questions, unfortunately. So, yeah, come back in, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Apologies for that. It was really just to finish off on that very, very briefly, to make sure that the experience of a citizen, if they moved from one part of the borough to another part, they would have a fairly similar feel to the type of experience that they would, if they moved from one area to another.
In fact, not only one area to another borough, possibly Monmouth, or
If they moved to another borough, I couldn't guarantee that they would have the same experience. If they moved to a different patch, yes, they would have similar experience. And we've also got transition arrangements in place that they don't move worker straight away anyway, so that there's a follow through of their existing worker for a while anyway.
You've given us a lot of information there. Do you want some more water? Can I ask Joe to give a question for number 6, is it? No, it's not. It's 7. It's 7, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, going back to the very beginning when you chose the model Vanguard, why did you choose them? Did you look at other models? Yeah, if you just answer that.
We initially identified Vanguard. So there are a number of models out there. However, we'd identified them through a piece of work we were doing with an Aaron Bevan at the time across mental health services. So we were testing out, and I did that initial training, some joint training, and the values, the principles, were absolutely everything that was ticking the box that we needed to be thinking about to meet our requirements under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. It's about that it was about being citizen focused. It was about listening. It was about listening to understand. It was about control for the person. It was. It was just one of those things that ticked all the boxes, and we went and found out more information.
Give that go. The next question is yours as well, I understand, is question 9.
I can remember watching the video link we were sent about this new model of delivery, and I can remember, it might have been Joe, I think, I'm not sure, saying about the sickness absence rate was quite high on the old model of delivery. Have you evaluated using the new model? Has sickness absence amongst staff come down?
But our sickness absence has come down, particularly our long-term sickness. We've still got short-term sickness issues, especially with the winter that we've just had.
January
wasn't great. But yes, our sickness, and more importantly, the morale amongst the staff when they are in work is higher, which is real positive for me. You can go into the team rooms and you can see smiles on faces, and you can understand. People say to me, this is what we came into social work for, and they understand where their values fit, where their principles fit. So for me, that's really important, because we're keeping the workforce engaged and wanting to do the job that they've always wanted to do.
Get supplementary, Joe? No? Okay. Can I take question 10 then? And that's using this model. It's going on the same theme as the sickness, really. Enabling me to live the life I choose, the way I choose to live it. How do you facilitate service users to make changes the way they may not want to make it? Examples are stop smoking, stop drinking. How do you manage the expectations of the families when they differ from the service users?
We will sometimes the service users will have different goals and different outcomes that they want to achieve. It's different from their families, and it's about how we manage risk and how we calculate what the risk is and whose risk is it, and whose life is it at the end of the day. And as long as we're clear about what the risks are, what's there to support people, how they could change if they wanted to. I think that's the important thing. Building the relationship, building the trust over time is important too. Change is very difficult for all of us, and it's even more difficult when you've got an illness or a disability, or you're facing poverty or whatever it is. So it's about that relationship model, and I think we see more change through that relationship model than we saw before.
There's two points I'll just pick up quickly, Chair. One is about how do you get someone to stop smoking or drinking or whatever. I guess that we don't. Sometimes it is about, as Joe said, you point out the risks. We all, if we have capacity, have the right to make unwise choices, and we are in control of those choices so long as we have capacity and we understand the risk. So we are not our relationship isn't about controlling somebody's behaviour. It's about ensuring that they have that information to make those choices. We may not agree with those choices, but that's people's right. That's the one part. The other bit about managing expectations is a difficult one. And I think we found through the pilot work that it is much easier to build that relationship where you haven't had any contact before. Where a client has, for want of a better word, been part of the service for many, many years. We have built up that expectation around the service provision, and there is an expectation. My neighbour four doors down has A, B, and C, or a daughter says, well, my friend's mum has. So we have. That is a difficult conversation because there is still a culture of expectation that the social services will give a service, and that's a difficult conversation to have. But that is absolutely the principles of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. It's not something that Torvine Adult Services all of a sudden said, we're not going to be doing this anymore. It's absolutely, we're working to the principles of the Act around the hierarchy of support, about ensuring that the people actually see what strengths that they have, what their community has, what their family network has, before the Adult Services Department would come in to provide and commission a service. And it's a difficult conversation. And I have to say, sometimes, and I'll be very honest, it is also a difficult concept sometimes for members to understand about, well, actually, why can't somebody go to a day centre? Well, actually, it's a different offer that we are now making. So it is a long journey, I suggest, for everybody and for some of the practitioners to come to that understanding.
Thank you both for that. I appreciate it is very early in the journey, and we will get there. But so a lot of it is about education, and we watch the space, obviously. Ask now, Faye, if you take question 12, please, Faye.
I keep forgetting to do that, sorry. Have you identified a full range of partners, including organisations from private or third sectors, who could play a productive role in your service area?
We've obviously started with key players like health, housing, Bron Avon, Melin, and people like that. We are getting to know our third sector partners in the communities. We recognise that we've got a long way to go in terms of our community work, though, and identifying partners. Our providers, we know the providers that we commission from and how we commission from them and the work that they do. Over the next year, our relationship with providers will need to change and develop in terms of new service offerings and new things that we're doing.
Whereas we've started to have that what matters conversation, we need to commission differently. At the moment, I would suggest we're still on very much a time and task relationship with our providers and a contractual relationship in our providers. So the work that we need to do, and I would suggest it's probably over 18 months, 2 years, is we need to move to outcome-based commissioning. We're currently working on a domiciliary care strategy, which kind of is exploring how we commission differently towards outcomes, toward patches, and what the options are. So at some stage, I know that will be coming to scrutiny, but we've still got quite a few months work to do on that. But yes, we need to trust our providers rather than saying, what time did you clock in, what time did you clock out, that time and task. We need to develop that relationship where the individual is deciding what outcomes, what matters to them, what that means, what outcomes they're looking for, and then that relationship with the providers about the client and the provider coming to the agreement of how that outcome will be met, rather than this becoming, I guess, too prescriptive. Because, again, huge piece of work.
Just ask a supplementary.
I think so. I was just going to ask you, it's difficult now sometimes to get third sector, because I know there's been a lot of cuts in those areas. But if you start trimming off bits of your model and perhaps relying on other services, can you see the model changing perhaps in a negative way from that?
I'm not quite sure what you're saying around the cuts in the service. I appreciate that in the voluntary sector, in some areas, there have been some cuts. There hasn't been anything locally around any cuts in voluntary services. In fact, one of the areas that we've started to look at about how do we support, and not particularly in the voluntary sector, but volunteers. Part of that, our work with the community, is that we are being approached by people in the community who would like to volunteer. So how can we support them and bring that kind of relationship together within that patch community? So again, it's a different resource. There's always going to be the need for domiciliary care. There's always going to be the need for residential and nursing care. But it's what people are telling us. They don't want to be reliant on that. It is about what else is out there. So this is not a model to find savings. This is a model to make sure that going forward we're going to be fit to respond to the increased demand without bankrupting without making the council bankrupt.
Okay, that's great.
Happy with that? Thank you. Can I ask Councillor Nick Jones to take question 13, please?
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is a range of questions which will follow afterwards, which Chair might allocate differently on there. And I'll just read on there. Is delivery viewed by partners as part of a whole system which reflects service users' full pathway through different services?
It absolutely fits in, and I'm particularly referring to the Health Board now, around their care closer to home strategy. And I think I'm not sure whether members have been fully briefed on the care closer to home strategy. It's a strategy which is launched or being developed by the Health Board in response to the way that they're going to be working differently under SCCC, and how they're going to use the DGHs differently, the District General Hospitals, Royal Gwent and Neville Hall differently, so that they can then move some of their services into the community, and what they're calling it is care closer to home. So all the kind of principles that we're working to about making people more independent, about looking at that patch base and working across it in a whole systems approach, it absolutely fits there. Where I think I alluded to it earlier, where we are having difficulty is around that kind of thinking about what matters to person and building on their strengths, when at the same time balancing that need for hospital discharge. And we're not there yet. We haven't got that synergy. Our housing colleagues, again, I think we've probably haven't paid sufficient attention in the past to the importance of housing, and how that supports somebody to remain in their own home, and the importance of housing. So we've done, I would suggest, some excellent work with our housing colleagues over the last 2 years about working together on some of the areas. So housing, health, so those have been the focus so far, but we've still got lots of work to do.
Just supplementary, Nick?
Not directly, but number 14 runs into that, and that probably would have been my supplementary from this.
Yes.
So I don't know whether you want to move directly onto that.
Yes, shall we go to question 15, because some of the questions have been answered to some of the parts.
No, that's fine.
So shall we go to question 16 then? And Nick, that's yours as well.
Do you want? Do we want 15?
Oh, sorry, jump one. 15, yes.
Okay, thank you. Have the Welsh Government been involved with the development and the evaluation of this model at all?
No, they haven't been directly involved. Some of the work that Simon from Vanguard is doing is working with public health and with Welsh Government. And the Welsh Government and public health representatives have been to the North Torfaen team to experience the model for themselves and how it's working in Torfaen.
We also have somebody, and I'm thinking top of my head, from Cardiff University coming.
From Care Council Wales.
From Care Council Wales. And there is another person from Public Health as well that is due to visit. So I'm sorry, I'm being a bit vague here, but because we do get a number of requests for from external agencies to come and visit to see what the model's like, because it is kind of word of mouth as well that actually is developing
the way we
some
work is we do talk about it, but the way we work is come and see it for yourself and come and experience it. It's what Vanguard called a normative experience, but that's the way we work. Come and see it. Come and ask us questions in the flesh, if you like.
So, no, we haven't had direct input from Welsh Government on the evaluation, but certainly there are a lot of external bodies that have shown interest and have visited.
Nick, do you want to come back in?
No, I'm fine.
I just wanted to ask, you said you haven't had no evaluation of the Welsh Government yet. When you have that evaluation, could that be made available to committee, please, Jill?
I don't know whether it will happen. We send our data into Welsh Government for as we have to for intermediate care funding, but it's very much about numbers and whatever. So there is no requirement or anything built in for a review by Welsh Government.
Thank you for that, Jill. The next question is 16, Nick, and this is the last question, and it's for you. Will you take question 16, Nick, please?
Yes, sorry, we've got some members, as we said earlier, that weren't here. This is we're asking this on behalf of some of the other members. So apologies for that. So again, I'll just read them as it is on here, and it does involve the Welsh Government again. Are you working with the Welsh Government to shape the reporting of performance measures and outcome measures? Maybe more generally, if you'd like to speak about some of the measurements that you're doing and some of the evaluations that you're doing, please.
Can I just say, as far as the Welsh Government and the performance framework, yes, there is another group that is looking again at the performance measures in adults care and in children's services. As there is a view that they are very much number-centred and do not take into account outcomes as they should do. That isn't as a result of the Vanguard work. That's very much a piece of work that's being inputted into by ADSS and the heads of adult services and children's services are representatives in that group. And that, to say, that is not a result of the Vanguard work. However, Joe has been working on some of the measures in the teams, which I'll ask Joe to explain now about actually, so what does that mean? Because when we talk about measures, what we want to know is, so what difference have we made? So some of the measures that we've got now about, and I will pick one about how many people have had their annual review on time.
That's a PI.
That's as a performance indicator, a Welsh performance indicator. This way of working will say, well, actually, if we've got a good relationship with that person and they know, actually, they can phone us any time that they want to review or they want to talk, and we'll respond to them. Actually, having a visit by somebody once a year that they don't know doesn't really tell us anything. So we have a different view on what's good performance and bad performance of reviews. But Joe, can I just ask you to tell me what work you've been doing?
PIs are around numbers, as Jill said, and they set targets. And the thinking from Vanguard is that if you set targets, you will work towards those targets without anything else, really. So we've tried in the patch measures to look at what difference are we making. Some of those will have numbers on in terms of we need to know demand, because if we don't know demand, we can't shape the teams, we can't shape the work that the teams do. But other ones are around how we support people. So have we looked at people's own strengths? Have we looked at the community? Have we looked at commission services? Continuity of a worker wouldn't be something that the PIs would look at, but it's something that when we went out in the Vanguard training to talk to people, people said was very important in terms of the relationship building. So it's important for them to have the same social worker to talk to, and not to repeat the story over and over again. So that is one of the measures, more about how are we making a difference. Staff morale and keeping people in work and happy in the work that they do. Again, no target, but again, it gives us a measure of are we doing the right thing, not only by the people that we serve, but by the people that work to serve those people. If they're happy, if they feel empowered, then they will pass that empowerment on to the people that they work with. Medically fit for discharge we will always have, because it's always important for people to go home from hospital. Nobody wants to stay in hospital longer than they need to. So we will always have hospital discharge, but not just hospital discharge. What did we do on that hospital discharge? How did we make a difference to that person's life after they were discharged from hospital? So we collect case studies. We ask people to tell us their story, really, in terms of how they feel the journey's going, how we could improve. And you've probably seen some of the measures up on the wall. It's not technical, because we feel if people own the measures, they'll become inherent in their practice. They won't be just looking at a document every now and again. They will be, making it live, really. And you've probably seen all sorts of pictures and things up on the wall to collect that data.
Thank you. Do you want to come back in? Question 17, Nick, is yours again.
Again, Chair, these are questions that came from other members. I think that's perhaps been answered. I think maybe we might be better moving on to 18.
I agree with some of the answers have been given already. There's duplication now. So if you take question 18 then, please, Nick.
Okay, I mean, very, very enheartened by the positive responses that you appear to be having with this model having been put in. And we just wanted to give you an opportunity to comment on whether you consider this model to be successful, and to give you an opportunity to give some views on how it could be improved further going forward, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I think we could say so far so good. I think we can say we've put a lot of work into the model. The staff have worked hard to bring the model to fruition. I think this next year now we will know more about the actual technical measures that we make. And with any model, there's always room for improvement. It's always about the service users and always about the type of service they need, and we'll respond to meet their needs.
Yeah, I would echo what Joe said. I don't think you can underestimate the amount of effort and time it has taken for all the teams and Joe and Sarah and everybody involved to get to where we are, because it is that massive change management on top of the day job, because you haven't been able to say, all right, we're not going to do any of this anymore. So it's on top of that day job of changing the mindset of 250 staff about taking them out of their comfort zone, moving them into new geographical localities. So the amount of background work that had to be done with the staff to get to there. And so I see it as absolutely the beginning of a longer journey. The teams are absolutely aching and biting at the bit to get out in the communities, to do very much more of that outward focus into the community, but with the knowledge that actually we do have to keep on responding to those hospital discharge, because the referrals are relentless and they're just. So that we have to ensure that we are managing the risk, we're responding to the referrals, but that's as we go forward, hopefully we can starts to settle and we can start to be more outward focus it into the communities, and the work that we've already identified that we want to do with the providers, because they are a huge resource and can have such a positive influence. We talk about building relationships with individuals. The carers, the paid carers, that in particularly the dom care agencies, they see those clients 3-4 times a day. When we're talking about relationships, they have very positive relationships. So there's a whole cohort of staff there that we can work with and we can learn from. So I think that for me, it's very much that community focus, how we work with the providers, and I've probably got another list like this, but everybody else kind of shakes when I start to go a little bit too far on.
You and supplementary, Nick?
The only thing that I would like to say, if you could encapsulate it, is there any specific recommendations that you would like to based on improvements that you'd like us to maybe to consider to move forward with?
We had a stock take session with the team leads in December?
December.
Yeah, December. And I think that there is a view about that consolidation of where we are. So I think we would like members actually, do you think we're going in the right direction? However, we do need to balance the way we move forward and the pace that we move forward with the capacity of officers and the teams to achieve that whilst doing the day job. So that's all I would ask for you as kind of members, is to bear with us, as in, because we can't do everything quickly. There is a kind of a phase. There's going to have to be a phased approach. In about 4 months' time. So we were lucky enough to secure ICF funding again for this year. What we intend to do for 1920 is kind of develop a further business case to be going back to ICF to say, okay, this we would like to make, and I would suggest it is about how do we use some additional resources, or the resource from the ICF, maybe to work with that, either the community or the providers to. So what we will be doing is, hopefully, from the outturn this year, we would be evidencing the staff that we are currently funding through ICF, we would be wanting to establish as part of the core funding, because so that we could stabilise the workforce, and then we will be going back to ICF to say we want to still access money from that external grant to start then doing the community work, because we have to stabilise the workforce as well. So I guess it's about getting your view, members, about using some of that money that we currently have earmarked for the third party, which hopefully we've been showing that we're underspending, to move that money into the workforce to secure that workforce.
Okay, Nick?
Yes.
Could I just add a comment as well in the report? What you were saying is right, Jill, but further down, much further down the road, thankfully, we're talking about over 85s increasing as well. So that's going to be a problem going forward.
It's about but it's about the skill mix then in the teams, because we already know that the number of people, as you said, quite rightly said, Councillor Evans, is increasing over 85. We know the prevalence of dementia. People over 85 will be increasing. So as we start to look at what does that team structure look like, do we need to think about CPNs in the community psychiatric nurses within the team? And we don't know, because that's why we are plotting out and marking on the wall about what expertise do we need as we're going forward. So, and again, it might not be one size fits all in all teams, but...
and we know our service responses will need to shape differently in terms of people in the future as well. Less people will maybe want residential and nursing care, so we need to look at alternatives, different kind of bed-based strategy, different kind of domiciliary care strategy.
We also know that the availability of the workforce in domiciliary care is going to be a real challenge. So we also need to be thinking, as we're going forward, assistive technology, different. So it's not just about people, it's about other resources that we can call upon and do differently as well.
Anyone else wish to come in? No? Well, I can ask Councillor Mike Jeremiah to take the last question.
Before I ask the question, I paid a visit to one of your units. Very, very impressed on how they work together. Fair play. You know, they were doing a great job, not only doing their own work, but they were, you know, intermingling and talking about But one of the things that come up, the staff spoke to the teams. The staff spoke about the benefits greatly of the inclusion of a community psychiatric nurse due to the high level of dementia cases being seen. How can we achieve this?
Was it the Pontypool Wellbeing team that you went? Was it the Pontypool Wellbeing team that you went to at the county hospital site? Yeah, that patch is for whatever reason is seeing a lot of people at the moment with a dementia need. When I say younger, I mean sort of 70 years old dementia and 90-year-old dementia, so a whole span of dementia needs. They have got mental health professional social workers in the team, but one of the links that they would want to make stronger is with T-Serial and the mental health team on the site. So they're using the grid that we talked about earlier, to mark up how many instances. And once we've got a business case, we will put that together to look at either a secondment or some kind of arrangement that we can put in place to support that dementia need. Yeah. In some ways, they're lucky because along the corridor from them, they've got the Alzheimer's Disease Society as well, the third sector organisation that we work closely with. So in some ways, they're lucky because they've got those on their doorstep, and they do have a lot of conversations about the preventative work and the lower level work that you can do, but it is around when somebody gets that complicated, complex diagnosis and how we move forward then in terms of not necessarily placing somebody in a residential home.
We also, I mean, as Joe said, it's about evidencing when does a level of need tip over that you need that level of expertise in the team rather than working together, because I know that there's also some positive work that goes on with the memory clinic, so that a member of the team also attends the memory clinic, so they have those joint discussions in the MDT. If you've got somebody with a presenting need that's known to the memory clinic, it's about the conversations and making sure those conversations and the sharing of the knowledge that goes on. But as Joe said, we are monitoring that to say, okay, so what is the input that's needed? Are we having a blip here? We have to make sure that that business case is sound and any presenting need is an ongoing one, not just a little bit of a blip.
Just supplement, because Jeremiah. Just on the back of that, Jill, I don't know, is there an opportunity to work with other authorities to get this position in place?
I would suggest not. The CPNs are employed by the Health Board, and if we are talking about a local response, we are not talking about, I would suggest that we wouldn't want to be responding to that on a regional footprint. I think it's about evidencing the need locally. So I appreciate your point. However, if we're looking at the kind of resource around a CPN, if you've got a CPN up in Rumney, again, that's a completely different demographic and response maybe needed up there than on the, say, the Pontypool patch. So I think I would very much be looking to see what is a local presenting need and how do we work with the Health Board around their locality working to make sure that we're dovetailing into the patch.
Obviously, I wasn't thinking of a Rumney, but I was
no,
thinking
but on a regional, but with the local authorities, obviously that it could be the 5 local authorities. That's what we cover, isn't it? From Rumney up to Chepstow, Monmouth. So. But, sorry, I might have got the wrong end of your question, Councillor Evans. I'm sorry.
It's just in mind of the conversation we had about the increase in dementia in the next 10 years, and it's just something to keep in our minds. Any other questions, members? No? Yeah, Pete?
And can I just say that I think the way you're working now is brilliant, and the Vanguard way of working reminds me of how things used to be in the good old days. And it's like we've gone full circle and gone back again.
There are parts of that. There are parts of that I would agree with. However, I think about that locality and the community focus, I would totally agree. About choice, control, and listening to understand, I don't think that we were very good at that. I would suggest maybe 15, 20 years ago. I think we had more of a we know better mentality.
My question was going to be, though, you were saying that your biggest difficulty is discharge from the NHS wards and what the doctors and nurses are saying to the patient before they discharge. Can you insist on training for them and perhaps some information put up on wards, or is that impossible?
No, it's not impossible. In fact, it's part of an email exchange we've been having over the last few days. And there is a leaflet that's being developed in the Health Board. And we were just talking, actually, as we were waiting to come in, that we do want the wording slightly changed, because it's interesting. The leaflet is about setting expectations, but the leaflet is saying, think about, when you discharge, do you need support? And then it says, if you do, go to social services. Whereas what we were saying is what we'd like in there is say, if you feel that you might have difficulty, first of all, discuss that with your family. Think about how you would manage and what arrangements you can make. And it's almost about that thinking, about the way that's set up is, if you can't manage, just give social services a ring. Whereas actually what we're trying to say is, actually think about that before you come in, because you might be able to put things into place, or your family might be able to help, or your neighbour might be able to help. If you can't do that, then fine. Then we would look at social services becoming involved. But it was that. But this leaflet was in response to our concerns, but it hasn't quite got the point. But we are in dialogue, and
I think sometimes the consultants, they think they know what's there from what they've worked with. They've worked with residential nursing placements in the past. They've seen those work, so they'll recommend those. It's about changing our conversations with consultants and people to say, well, there are other things we can do before we get to residential and nursing homes.
That's great.
And the workforce in the NHS is huge. So you can look at training sessions or information sessions. But I would suggest that's a team of people doing that day in, day out, and within 6 months you've got such a turnover of staff, it's never ending. And that doesn't stop with drip, 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 drip. We'll keep on giving the message.
Brilliant.
Okay, anyone else wish to come in? Okay, it only remains me to thank you, Jill and Joe, for coming this afternoon and giving us all this information. It's very worthwhile, I feel, and I'm sure the members would agree. And I'd echo the sentiments that have been expressed by Faye and others here today, that we visited various sites and we were well pleased with what was going on there. And could you relay that to the staff who were working there? And thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Right then, we've viewed the information given by Jill and Joe, and now we're going to arrive at some of the recommendations out of that information, and I'll open it up to the floor. Joe?
A recommendation to develop the relationships with partners and organisations in the third sector.
Yeah, I think that Jill did point that out, didn't she, that there was ongoing work. There is ongoing work with the public sector to that end. So I think that is the recommendation, is that that be pursued. Come in, Joe.
Also, as well, that could include the volunteers as well. With Jill mentioned that there was a lot of interest in volunteering.
Yeah. I think the one that Councillor Jeremiah mentioned as well with the specialist nurse needs to be explored. I know there's difficulties in trying to put that in place, but I think we should recommend it for future discussions. I don't know what everyone thinks about that. Yeah.
I just think this looks like such a good way of working. Could we revisit this in a couple of months' time to see how they're doing? Do you think that's worth trying?
I think that's very important that we monitor it as it's going, and I think we should do that. I think she offered that facility anyway, didn't she, that to come back. But I think, yeah, it's key that our recommendation takes account of that.
We'll be, towards the end of the cycle, we'll be coming into visioning, so once we go through that process, that's something you can raise at visioning so we can keep it in the basket of items going forward.
I think maybe we want to have a recommendation based on the specific recommendations that they were talking about at the end there, with regard to, they were mentioning that they've got some ICF funding which they wanted to look at and see if it could be incorporated within the core funding so that they could then move forward and expand the good work that they're doing.
Yeah.
If we could word something to try and look at the possibility of doing that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know what our members think. I think that's definitely. There was some concern mentioned this afternoon about the some residents would be perhaps reluctant to visit Bronavon areas, especially if there's a conflict. I think there needs to be something put in place that if that eventuality arises, there needs to be another offered place. You want to come in?
I totally agree with that, because as a councillor I've come across a couple of cases where people are so having such difficulties, or as they see it, difficulties with Bronavon, that they're not happy to take things on that they've offered. So that Bronavon is such a big organisation, that is something that worries me, that we're allowing that to go in there, good in many ways, but there are those possible difficulties, perhaps even a conflict in some cases.
So is the recommendation around investigating the appropriateness of the base at Bronavon?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's just a note, not a recommendation, that we can note that the sickness levels have dropped, and there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for the new methodology. I think we can note that, and we are happy to note that.
And
Okay.
can we note that I think we're all really impressed by it, and can we put that down as well, how smoothly it seems to be running, how enthusiastic everyone is, and how personal it seems to be. It's brilliant, isn't it?
I wish this could, the scrutiny committee had the opportunity to visit these areas. I wish this could be extended to the members of the council, really, because I think they'd find it of real interest. I don't know whether we could make that a recommendation or a...
Thank you, Chair. One of the things you picked up during the discussions was the Care Closer to Home network, the Aneurin Bevan strategy. I think there may be an action there to request a members' seminar on that, so all members can be aware of what that strategy is, and on the back of that then we can include information about the patch-based working as well and how that dovetails.
Yeah.
So I think that would be...
I think that would fit in very nicely, wouldn't it? Yeah. Okay. Come in, yeah.
Also, I think you're very interested to hear about the development that's gone on so far, and they need to consolidate. So I don't know whether you're minded to recommend that prior to further development that they stop, take a breath, celebrate how far they've come, and consolidate what the model before moving forward.
I think that makes a lot of sense, because they might, if they go too fast, they might lose something from the original model, mightn't they? And that is often the way things go, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it'd be good
Yeah.
to
I think that's a good...
make that a good recommendation.
Any other recommendations? Yeah, come in, Lisa.
Also, when you spoke to Simon in the beginning, you asked specifically around relationships with Welsh Government and legislation and regulators. And he said there are some issues around inspectors and regulators. Would you be minded to recommend that they invite regulators to take part in a normative experience to increase their understanding of the model?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, members, you happy to go with that recommendation? Yeah, I think it's a very good one. Come in, Alan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Part of your scrutiny activity was to answer the question, are the service area making a positive difference to this new model? So would you agree or not that they are making a positive difference?
Okay.
Is that agreed?
It's agreed. I mean, they said they're saving money, didn't they? Even though the need is going up, there seem to be so many positives, from staff illness right the way down,
Yeah.
diminishing, things like that.
Yeah. Anyone else want to come in?
Yes, just very briefly on that. We heard an awful lot about what the service was doing, and one of the ones we didn't maybe come to was to make an inquiry of the actual citizens, the people to find out whether they've actually experienced a different, because I think some of these people have been in the system for some time, and I think we just need to check that this is actually meeting their expectations as well, and that they're getting the most out of this change.
Good point.
Maybe some form of a survey for them to just check that.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're happy, but just to check it.
Part of the national indicators that are submitted by Adult Services is a questionnaire of all their adult clients. I do have access to that data, so I can share that data with you. Also, pre-agenda, there was a video, and it was the video that was part of the presentation they made at the National Vanguard conference. And within that video, there's some service users that were included in that, and their opinions of how the service has changed and what their experiences were.
Yeah.
So maybe the recommendation ought to be for them to update that, to check that, because that was done a little while ago, to update. That'd be okay.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Nick. The perception of the users is important, and you should have asked that earlier, but we can ask it now.
And lastly, do you support the redesign of the service continuing?
Well, I do overwhelmingly, because it's producing results at the moment, and the evidence is there. I'm sure all the members agree, don't they? That concludes the meeting for today. Thank you for your attendance. There hasn't been many of us here, but I think we've had some quality discussions and put forward some good recommendations, and I thank you for your attendance. The next meeting will take place on the 10th of May in the chamber. In the chamber. Okay. Thank you all for your attendance, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.